We're going to start here this half hour, though, with a murder mystery involving a college student.
Reagan Tokes was looking ahead to her graduation from The Ohio State University. She went missing after leaving work the other night. Now her body has been found, and ABC's Eva Pilgrim has more on how police are trying to track down her killer.
She left work like she always did. It was a normal night in Columbus, her last shift before graduation, and a text to her dad saying she was on her way home. But Reagan Tokes never walked through that door. A bright, 21-year-old Ohio State student, driven, smart, loved by her friends and family, vanished into the dark without a trace. No fight picked, no wrong turn, just a wrong man. And he was being tracked, or so everyone thought. What happens when the system designed to protect fails in real time? When the man authorities are supposedly watching isn't just out there, but hunting? He had a GPS ankle monitor strapped to his leg. He was fresh out of prison, and still, no one stopped him. Do you think people being monitored by GPS are actually being watched? Let us know what you think in the comments. What happened over the next 12 hours would force lawmakers to ask, how many others have slipped through the cracks? If you're new to this channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from viewers around the world. Before the headlines, before the trial, and before the outrage, there was Reagan Tokes. She was 21, a psychology major at The Ohio State University, set to graduate in just a few months. Reagan was the kind of young woman anyone would be proud to know, thoughtful, responsible, full of life, and quietly determined to make a difference. Born in Maumee, Ohio, a suburb of Toledo, Reagan grew up in a close-knit family with strong values. Her parents, Lisa and Toby Tokes, raised her and her younger sister in a home filled with support and high expectations. Not the kind that creates pressure, but the kind that inspires purpose. They didn't just encourage her to succeed, they believed she would. Reagan took that belief seriously. She was never the loudest in the room, but her presence was steady. Teachers remembered her as bright and driven. Friends say she was loyal, caring, and full of quiet confidence. She was the kind of friend who'd text just to say, "Thinking of you, hope today's a good one." In college, she kept a strong GPA while balancing work and social life. She was studying psychology not just to earn a degree, she genuinely wanted to understand people and help them. Her dream was to work in counseling or behavioral therapy, possibly with kids or families. She had no illusions that life would be easy, but she believed in doing meaningful work. During her final semester at OSU, Reagan was working part-time at Bodega, a restaurant and bar in the short North District of Columbus. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it helped her pay bills and gain some independence. She took her responsibilities seriously, always showing up on time and walking coworkers to their cars after late shifts. She was cautious, aware of the risks young women often face, and careful not to take chances. By early 2017, she had just completed a study abroad program in Spain the year before, a trip that expanded her world and deepened her confidence. She was actively planning for her future, finishing final coursework, applying for jobs, and figuring out where she wanted to go after graduation. Her goals weren't flashy, they were real. A stable career, a fulfilling life, maybe travel more, one day maybe start a family. But Reagan wasn't just about plans, she was about people. Her coworkers said she brought calm to chaotic shifts. Friends described her as the glue of the group, the one who remembered birthdays, checked in after breakups, and showed up when you needed her most. There's a photo her family shared, Reagan with a wide, easy smile, wearing an OSU sweatshirt, standing in a field at golden hour. She looks happy, healthy, full of direction. That image stuck with people, not because of what it symbolized, but because it was true. Her life was ordinary in the best way. She wasn't chasing fame. She wasn't trying to be the center of attention. She was simply living with purpose, doing the right things, keeping herself safe, working hard. That's what made what happened so hard to understand. Reagan didn't take risks. She wasn't walking into danger knowingly. She finished her shift, texted her dad, and headed to her car to drive home, a route she'd taken many times before. It's what makes this story not just tragic, but terrifying. Because if it could happen to someone like Reagan, someone who was smart, cautious, and grounded, it could happen to anyone. And when her parents didn't hear from her the next morning, when she didn't respond to texts or show up where she was supposed to be, they knew something was wrong. Deeply wrong. What followed was a nightmare they never could have imagined. But to understand the full weight of what happened, we have to remember who she was. Reagan Tokes was not just a college student, not just a statistic. She was someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's friend. She had plans. She had people who loved her. And most of all, she had every reason to believe she'd live to see those plans unfold. Brian Goldsby wasn't an unknown threat. He wasn't a first-time offender. His violence didn't come out of nowhere. He had a history, a dark one. In 2010, Goldsby was convicted of robbery and attempted rape after attacking a woman in the parking lot of her apartment complex. He beat her, dragged her, threatened to kill her, and tried to sexually assault her before running off with her belongings. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison, not for his first crime, but one of several prior offenses. He was known to the system, in and out of juvenile detention, a trail of violent behavior stretching back to his teenage years. Assault, theft, harassment. Each time, authorities treated it like a bump in the road, like he might turn things around. By 2016, he was nearing the end of his sentence. The state released him from prison in November, placing him in a halfway house in Columbus. As a condition of his parole, he was required to wear a GPS ankle monitor at all times. But here's the critical part. While Goldsby's movements were technically being recorded, no one was actively watching them. The data collected from his ankle monitor was stored and reviewed later, not in real time. So when he started frequenting high-crime areas, when he violated parole by wandering into prohibited zones, no alerts were sent. Nothing stopped him. No one intervened. It was like giving someone the keys to a cage and never checking if they used them. Now here's where the story takes a more disturbing turn. As Goldsby settled into his new surroundings in the halfway house, he didn't look for work. He didn't try to get his life on track. He started hunting. Over the next few weeks, Goldsby was linked to multiple robberies in the Columbus area, all while wearing that ankle monitor. He stalked women, followed them home, ambushed them outside their apartments. In some cases, he threatened them with a gun. But no one connected the dots. No one saw the pattern. Then, on the night of February 8, 2017, he spotted Reagan. She wasn't a target of opportunity. She was someone he chose. She was walking alone. She was young. She looked safe, trusting of her surroundings. Maybe he thought she wouldn't fight back. Maybe he thought no one would notice until it was too late. And maybe, just maybe, he felt invincible. After all, he had already broken the rules several times, and nothing happened. Flashback to weeks before Reagan's murder. Goldsby was seen on surveillance footage in areas he was never supposed to be. He took long, aimless walks late at night, sometimes staying out for hours. Each step tracked, each violation logged, but the alerts never triggered. This wasn't just negligence, it was a complete failure of a system designed to protect people like Reagan. He had a GPS tethered to his leg, but no watchful eyes followed where he went. And the worst part? Goldsby knew that. He knew no one was paying attention. He used the illusion of supervision as a shield. And the cost of that failure wasn't just bureaucratic, it was human. February 8th, 2017 started like any other day for Reagan Tokes. She had class at Ohio State, texted her dad a little later in the day, and then clocked in for her evening shift at Bodega, a trendy spot in the Short North Arts District, one of Columbus's most vibrant neighborhoods. It was a routine Wednesday night, the kind she'd worked through dozens of times before. She moved with ease between tables, her OSU sweatshirt sleeves pulled halfway up, laughing with coworkers, refilling drinks, smiling for customers. There was no indication that anything unusual was about to happen. The restaurant closed, staff cleaned up, and Reagan stayed to finish her duties. She said her goodbyes, told coworkers to text her when they got home safe, the kind of thoughtful send-off she was known for, then stepped outside just before 10 p.m. She began the short walk toward her car, which was parked along a quiet side street nearby. This part of her night never used to feel dangerous. Reagan was cautious, yes, but this wasn't some unfamiliar alleyway. She was only a block or two from well-lit, populated areas. She had done this walk before, but this night was different. As she reached her car, someone was waiting. 35-year-old Brian Goldsby, recently released from prison after serving time for robbery and attempted rape, had been lurking in the area. He wasn't just free, he was wearing a GPS ankle monitor as part of his parole. A system meant to protect the public, a system the state insisted made neighborhoods safer. That night, Goldsby watched Reagan, followed her. Then, in one terrifying moment, he forced her into her car at gunpoint. It was fast, brutal, no warning, and no chance for Reagan to run. Over the next several hours, Goldsby drove Reagan around Columbus in her own car. Investigators later pieced together a chilling timeline using GPS data and security camera footage. During that time, Goldsby withdrew money from her bank account at multiple ATMs, forcing her to give up her PIN. At one point, he made her remove her clothing. At another, he told her to climb into the trunk. She complied with everything he asked. Then, sometime after midnight, he drove her to Scioto Grove Metro Park, an open stretch of land bordered by trees and silence. That's where he raped her, and that's where he shot her twice in the head, killing her. He left her there, in the freezing cold, and drove off in her car. Her body wasn't found until the next day by a passerby who noticed something off near a park trailhead. Within hours, the investigation was underway. Police tracked Reagan's final moments through a combination of ATM footage, phone records, and that GPS data, the very same tracking data that had been following Goldsby the entire night. Here's what shocked the public. At the time of Reagan's abduction, Goldsby had been out of prison for just 3 months. He had a violent record, he was on parole, and he was being electronically monitored by the state of Ohio. But no one had been watching him in real time. The ankle monitor tracked his movements, but no one was actively alerted when he loitered around bars or wandered into restricted areas. No red flags went off when he went out late at night or passed through places he shouldn't have been. The state had the data, but no one was using it. Reagan's murder wasn't just a tragedy, it was a systemic failure. A young woman was abducted, assaulted, and killed while the man responsible wore a GPS monitor on his ankle. A man whose movements could have been reviewed, flagged, investigated, but weren't. Not until it was far too late. The public wanted answers. How could a man with a violent history, one who had tried to rape a woman during a robbery years earlier, be allowed to walk free with so little supervision? Why wasn't the GPS tracking monitored in real time? And most horrifying of all, if someone had simply been watching the data live, could Reagan have been saved? These were no longer just questions of justice. They were questions of accountability. But before there were lawsuits, before there were reforms, before there was a trial, there was a family who woke up the next morning expecting a text from their daughter, and instead got a knock on the door. The kind that changes everything. By the morning of February 9th, 2017, Reagan Tokes hadn't come home. Her friends and family were panicked. She always checked in, always let someone know she was safe. When she didn't respond to calls or texts, worry turned to fear. Her employer at Bodega confirmed she'd finished her shift around 9 p.m. and left alone. A short walk to her car, parked just down the street. A routine night, a familiar route. But Reagan had vanished. Columbus police quickly launched a missing persons investigation. Hours ticked by without a break. Then came the first clue. Her car, a dark gray Acura, was found abandoned in the German village area, several miles from where she had last been seen. Her purse and phone were missing. The driver's seat had been pushed far back, too far for Reagan to have comfortably driven it. This wasn't just a case of a lost phone or a detour. Something was clearly wrong. That same day, a body was discovered at Scioto Grove Metro Park in Grove City. A young woman, nude, shot twice in the head, left in the woods. It was Reagan. The discovery sent shock and grief rippling across the Ohio State campus and beyond. Her family, still hoping she might walk through the door, now faced the unimaginable. Police, already under pressure, began retracing her final movements. That's when GPS data came into focus, not from Reagan, but from Goldsby. The results were damning. The monitor showed Goldsby leaving the halfway house around 6 p.m. It tracked him walking to the Short North area, precisely where Reagan worked. Later, it showed him at the site where Reagan's car was abandoned, then at the park where her body was found. Step by step, It painted a timeline that aligned exactly with Reagan's disappearance and murder. Goldsby was arrested on February 11th, just days after Reagan's body was discovered. In police custody, he waived his Miranda rights and confessed. No hesitation, no emotion. He told them he approached Reagan at gunpoint as she walked to her car, forced her inside, made her withdraw money from an ATM, drove her around, raped her, then shot her twice before dumping her body in the woods. His tone, investigators later said, was flat, as if he were describing a routine errand. There was no apology, no trace of guilt, just details. When news of Goldsby's arrest became public, outrage erupted. How had someone with his history, violent, repeat offenses, been released with such minimal oversight? How had the GPS data, which could have flagged his suspicious behavior days or even weeks before, gone unchecked?
We are continuing to follow developing news after a young woman's body was found outside Scioto Grove Metro Park.
Also, no official word quite yet as to who this body belongs to. Of course, once we learn that information, hopefully today, we will be sure to pass it on to you.
It could have been a random act. It could have been somebody that this occurred someplace else and she was dumped here.
Reagan's parents, Lisa and Toby Tokes, were devastated, but they also wanted answers. They spoke publicly, not only about their daughter's life and potential, but about the systemic failures that allowed her death to happen. Lisa Tokes remembered Reagan as a little girl with a bright laugh, who made handmade cards for everyone in the family, a teenager who tutored other students, a young woman who didn't take risks, who always let people know where she was. She did everything right, Lisa said. She had a plan, she had dreams, and she was taken by someone who should have never had the chance. Their heartbreak wasn't silent, it became a movement. The Tokes family began pushing for legislative change in Ohio, demanding a better system for monitoring released offenders, real-time alerts, and accountability. The state had failed Reagan, that was clear. But her family was determined she would not be forgotten. Reagan's story didn't end with her death. It sparked outrage, yes, but also change. And it put a spotlight on just how flawed parts of the justice system truly were. A young woman had been murdered, a predator had been monitored, and a grieving family was left to ask the question no parent should ever face. What would have happened if someone had just been paying attention? As the case against Brian Goldsby moved into the courtroom, it became painfully clear just how broken Ohio's parole system had been. For Reagan's family, the trial was a nightmare they had to endure. Not only for the crime committed against their daughter, but for the failures that led to her death. The details of Reagan's final moments were laid bare in the courtroom. The prosecution painted a harrowing picture of what transpired on the night of February 8, 2017. Reagan was abducted just steps away from the safety of her car as she was walking through the parking lot of the Bodega restaurant. Goldsby forced her into her vehicle, terrorizing her as he drove her to a secluded area. Evidence presented in court made it clear how much she fought to survive, an act of defiance and courage that ultimately cost her life. One of the most chilling elements of the trial was the GPS data. It had tracked Goldsby's every movement on the night of the crime. It recorded his whereabouts as he moved from the halfway house to Reagan's place of work, then to the area where he abandoned her car, and ultimately to the park where he discarded her body. The GPS evidence confirmed the timeline of events with terrifying precision. It was clear to the public and to Reagan's family that Goldsby should never have had the opportunity to commit such a crime if he was monitored. The outrage grew as it became evident that the very system designed to protect the public had failed on a fundamental level. The courtroom became a stage for that outrage. Reagan's parents, Lisa and Toby Tokes, were there every day, their faces drawn with grief, but also with the determination to demand justice not only for their daughter, but for the countless others who could be at risk due to a system that didn't do its job. They watched, hearts breaking, as the prosecution presented the case against Goldsby, but their pain only deepened as they learned more about the system that had failed Reagan and failed so many others. The evidence was damning, but Goldsby's behavior during the trial also spoke volumes. His indifference to Reagan's death was palpable. He didn't offer an apology or any sign of remorse. His demeanor was cold, calculated, as though the pain he caused meant nothing. His confession had been chilling in its bluntness, and now, as the details of the crime were laid out, it became even more evident how much the system had enabled his actions. In the wake of Goldsby's conviction, the outrage surrounding his sentence was fierce. He was sentenced to death in 2019 after being found guilty of capital murder, aggravated murder, kidnapping, rape, and other charges. His sentence was met with mixed reactions. Some believed it was justice, while others focused their attention on the systemic failures that allowed someone like Goldsby to commit such a brutal crime. The media, local and national, covered every aspect of the trial. But the story didn't end there. Reagan's family was determined to seek justice not only in the courtroom, but through every avenue available. They filed a lawsuit against the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction, ODRC, the agency responsible for monitoring offenders like Goldsby. The lawsuit argued that the ODRC had failed in its duty to actively supervise Goldsby, despite his violent past and the GPS ankle monitor that should have been tracking his movements in real time. The Tokes family contended that Reagan's death could have been prevented had the system been functioning as it was supposed to. This lawsuit added fuel to the fire of public outrage. People began to question how many other violent offenders wearing ankle monitors were slipping through the cracks of the parole system. It wasn't just Goldsby's case that sparked this reckoning. It was the revelation that Ohio's parole system, and by extension the system in place for monitoring offenders, was fundamentally flawed. No one had been watching. The case forced Ohio lawmakers to take a closer look at their parole system and electronic monitoring programs. Advocates for reform pushed for a complete overhaul of the system, demanding stricter monitoring of parolees and more accountability from the Department of Rehabilitation and Correction. Reagan's tragic death became the rallying cry for change. In the months following the trial, the Tokes family continued to speak out. They used their grief to advocate for legislative changes that could help prevent similar tragedies from occurring. They called for improved GPS monitoring and greater oversight for high-risk offenders, those who had shown a history of violence and had the potential to strike again. While Reagan's murder can never be undone, her family made it their mission to ensure that no other family would have to endure the same heartbreak. They became champions for victims of violent crimes, pushing for a better, safer system that wouldn't allow offenders to slip through the cracks. Reagan Tokes' story is not just one of a tragic loss, but also of unfulfilled dreams. A young woman who had so much life ahead of her, so many plans and aspirations, her future was cut short in the most brutal and senseless way. In the blink of an eye, the world lost a bright, driven, and kind-hearted individual, all because the systems meant to protect her were tragically flawed. The illusion of safety created by GPS ankle monitors is one of the most critical lessons learned from Reagan's case. The system relies on the assumption that offenders will be kept under constant supervision, yet this is not always the case. Goldsby's movements were recorded by his ankle monitor, but because there was no active real-time monitoring, no one knew where he was when it mattered most. This oversight allowed him to carry out his crime undetected, highlighting how vulnerable the public is when electronic monitoring systems are not accompanied by real vigilance. For years, parole and probation systems have relied on passive forms of monitoring to track offenders, but Reagan's murder revealed just how ineffective this approach can be. What was supposed to be a measure of safety, a GPS ankle monitor, ended up being little more than an unmonitored data log. If there had been real-time surveillance, Goldsby's dangerous behavior could have been flagged, potentially preventing Reagan's abduction and murder. The case underscored the need for real-time surveillance systems that would not just track offenders, but also ensure active oversight by parole officers or monitoring teams. In response to the failure in Goldsby's case, Reagan's Law was introduced, a proposed legislative reform aimed at improving the monitoring of high-risk offenders. The law advocates for real-time monitoring, where every movement of dangerous individuals on parole would be observed by authorities, ensuring prompt action if necessary. Reagan's Law also calls for stricter requirements for offenders with violent criminal histories, including more intensive oversight and closer scrutiny of their behavior. Reagan's memory is a reminder of the promise that was stolen from her. She had dreams of graduating, building a career, and making an impact in the world. Her life, however, was cut short, not by chance, but by a system that failed to protect her. Reagan's family wants the world to remember her not as just another victim of a senseless crime, but as a young woman whose light was extinguished too soon. She was a friend, a daughter, a student, a waitress, someone who was loved and who loved in return. Reagan's death should not be the end of her story, but a call for change. This case sends a powerful message about the need for stronger victim protection systems. Reagan's family, fueled by their grief, became advocates for those who had no voice, those whose lives were in danger because the systems designed to protect them were insufficient. Their fight for justice was not just about securing a conviction for Goldsby, but about creating real change, ensuring that the tragedy that befell Reagan would lead to the kind of systemic reform that could save others. As we reflect on Reagan's case, it's crucial to ask ourselves, how can we prevent another tragedy like this from happening? What steps need to be taken to ensure that those under parole or probation are not just monitored, but actively supervised? How can we create a system that doesn't let violent offenders slip through the cracks? To honor Reagan's memory is to support efforts for reform, to push for a system that works, and to demand that the failures that allowed her death to happen are not repeated. Her story isn't just a reminder of a life lost, but a call to action for those who have the power to change the system. We can't undo what happened to Reagan, but we can learn from it. We can advocate for a future where those under supervision are truly monitored, where no more lives are lost because of a system that failed to do its job. Reagan's legacy lives on in the reforms she inspired, in the conversations she sparked, and in the hearts of everyone who continues to fight for a safer, more just world. Do you think our system is doing enough to protect people like Reagan? Comment below and share your thoughts. Your voice matters.